The planet Leora was dying. Its skies were no longer the bright blue they once were, but instead a sickly shade of green, filled with swirling clouds of toxic gas. The air smelled sharp and metallic, making it hard to breathe for anyone who ventured outside without protective gear. Plants that had once thrived in rich soil now withered away, their leaves yellowed and brittle. Animals had either perished or fled to whatever corners of the planet still held traces of clean air. Life on Leora was fading fast, and its people knew it. Elena Cruz stood at the edge of what used to be a vast forest. Now all that remained were skeletal trees, their branches reaching out like desperate hands toward a sky that offered no mercy. She wore a breathing mask over her face, its filters working overtime to keep the toxins at bay. Her dark hair was tied back neatly, though strands escaped here and there, sticking to her forehead from sweat. Elena had spent years studying the atmosphere of her planet, trying to understand how it had gone so wrong and, more importantly, how to fix it, but nothing she tried seemed to make a difference. Her lab coat flapped in the faint breeze as she turned away from the barren landscape. It felt heavier today than usual, weighed down not just by the tools in its pockets, but by the crushing weight of failure. Elena had poured everything into her work, her time, her energy, even pieces of her soul, but none of it mattered if she couldn't find a solution. Every day brought new reports of illness among the population, of crops failing, of rivers drying up or turning poisonous, and every day she woke up knowing she was running out of time. Back at the research facility, Elena walked past rows of equipment humming softly, screens displaying graphs and data points that meant little to anyone but her. Her colleagues moved around silently, their faces etched with exhaustion. They were good people, brilliant minds, but even they had started losing hope. Elena hated seeing that look in their eyes. She wanted to tell them everything would be okay, that they'd figure something out before it was too late. But she couldn't bring herself to say the words because deep down, she wasn't sure she believed them anymore. That evening, after most of the team had gone home, Elena stayed behind. She sat alone in the dim light of her office, staring at a stack of papers covered in scribbled notes and equations. None of it made sense anymore. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes, letting out a slow breath. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to give up, to walk away from this endless fight and let nature take its course. But then she opened her eyes again and shook her head. Giving up wasn't an option. Not while there was still a chance, however small, that she could save her world. It was during one of these late nights that Elena stumbled upon something unusual. While scanning through deep space transmissions, a task she often did in search of any information that might help her cause, she picked up a signal unlike anything she'd heard before. At first she thought it was interference, static distorting the audio. But as she listened closer, she realized it was a message, a human voice, speaking calmly and clearly. "Attention, all planetary systems within range," the voice said. "This is Daniel Carter, engineer aboard the Earth vessel Horizon. My team has developed a revolutionary technology capable of purifying polluted environments. If your planet is facing ecological collapse, please respond to this transmission. We may be able to assist." Elena froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Could this really be true? Was there someone out there with the knowledge and tools to save Leora? She replayed the message several times, committing every word to memory. Then, without hesitation, she activated the communication system and sent a reply. "This is Elena Cruz, lead scientist of Leora," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Our planet's atmosphere is toxic and deteriorating rapidly. Our efforts to reverse the damage have failed. Please, if you can help us, we need your assistance urgently." For days, Elena waited anxiously for a response. She checked the transmission logs constantly, fearing she might have missed something. Doubts crept into her mind. What if the message had been a hoax? What if no one responded? But then, just when she was starting to lose hope, the system lit up with an incoming reply. "Elena Cruz, this is Daniel Carter," the voice said. "I've received your message and am deeply sorry to hear about your situation. I believe my invention, the ether converter, could potentially address the issues you're facing. Tell me more about your planet's specific challenges, and we'll see if we can adapt the technology to suit your needs. Relief washed over Elena like a tidal wave. Someone out there cared enough to listen, to offer help. For the first time, in months, she felt a flicker of hope. Over the next few days, Elena exchanged detailed messages with Daniel, explaining the composition of Leora's atmosphere and sharing data from her experiments. He asked thoughtful questions and offered suggestions based on his own experience. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Elena found herself smiling more often than she had in years. Finally, Daniel announced that he would travel to Leora personally to assess the situation and begin working on a solution. Elena couldn't believe it. A stranger, willing to leave his own world behind to help save hers. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or guilty for dragging him into such a daunting task. Either way, she knew one thing for certain. Daniel Carter was Leora's best, and perhaps only chance at survival. When the day of his arrival came, Elena stood nervously at the landing site, watching as a sleek spacecraft descended from the sky. Dust swirled around her boots as the ship touched down gently, its engines whining to a stop. The hatch opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, with short brown hair and a friendly smile that immediately put Elena at ease. This was Daniel Carter, the man who might just save her planet. "Elena?" he called out, shielding his eyes from the harsh sunlight. "Yes, that's me," she replied, stepping forward. "Thank you for coming." Daniel nodded, his expression serious but kind. "Of course. Let's get to work." Daniel Carter followed Elena across the desolate landscape, his boots crunching against the dry, cracked ground. The air was thick and heavy, even through the advanced filtration system in his breathing mask. He glanced around, taking in the barren fields and skeletal trees that stretched as far as the eye could see. Everything looked dead, lifeless, like a painting drained of color. It was hard to believe this place had once been vibrant and full of energy. Elena walked ahead of him, her movements quick and purposeful. She seemed determined to get back to the research facility as soon as possible. Daniel didn't blame her. Time was clearly not on their side. Still, he couldn't help but notice how tense she seemed, her shoulders squared and her jaw set tight. He wanted to say something, anything to lighten the mood, but he wasn't sure what would be appropriate. Instead, he focused on observing his surroundings, trying to piece together a mental map of the planet's condition. The silence between them was broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the occasional gust of wind carrying traces of ash and dust. After several minutes, Daniel finally spoke. "How long has it been like this?" he asked, gesturing toward the bleak horizon. Elena hesitated for a moment before answering. "Decades," she said quietly. "At first it was slow. People didn't notice. Or maybe they just chose not to. But over time, the damage became impossible to ignore. Now," she trailed off, shaking her head. "Now we're running out of options." Daniel nodded, though he wasn't sure if she could see the gesture through her mask. He understood the weight of what she was saying. Back on Earth, he'd seen similar situations play out on smaller scales, polluted rivers, smog-choked cities, but nothing quite like this. Leora wasn't just sick, it was dying, and if they didn't act quickly, there might not be anything left to save. When they reached the research facility, Elena led him inside. The building was modest but functional, filled with rows of equipment and monitors displaying streams of data. Scientists moved about the space, some typing furiously at keyboards while others examined samples under microscopes. The atmosphere was tense, almost palpable, as if everyone knew exactly how high the stakes were. "This is where we've been working," Elena said, gesturing to a large table covered in blueprints and notes. "We've tried everything: carbon, filters, chemical neutralizers, even genetically modified plants designed to absorb toxins. Nothing works for long enough to make a real difference." Daniel stepped closer, examining the materials spread out before him. There was no denying the effort that had gone into these attempts. The team had clearly left no stone unturned in their quest for a solution, but despite their best efforts, The results were painfully clear. Leora's atmosphere continued to deteriorate. Elena watched him carefully, her expression unreadable. "Do you think your ether converter can handle this?" she asked after a moment. Her voice was calm, but Daniel could hear the underlying desperation. "I won't lie to you. It's going to be a challenge," he admitted. The converter was designed for localized pollution, not an entire planet, but I believe it's adaptable. We'll need to run tests, modify the design, and figure out how to scale it up. It won't be easy, but I'm confident we can make it work. Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. Not because Daniel had promised success, he hadn't, but because he sounded genuinely willing to try. That alone was more than she'd dared to hope for. Over the next few days, Daniel threw himself into the work. He spent hours poring over data, consulting with Elena and her team, and sketching out new designs for the converter. The process was painstaking, requiring precision and patience. Every detail mattered, from the composition of the planet's air to the durability of the materials they planned to use. Even the smallest oversight could mean failure. Elena worked alongside him, offering insights and suggestions whenever she could. She admired Daniel's focus and determination, qualities that reminded her of herself when she'd first started this fight. But unlike her, Daniel seemed unfazed by the enormity of the task ahead. He approached each problem with a quiet confidence that inspired those around him. One evening, after another long day of testing and troubleshooting, Daniel and Elena found themselves alone in the lab. Most of the team had gone home, leaving the two of them surrounded by the soft hum of machinery. Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, but there was still a spark of determination in them. "You know," he said after a pause, "this isn't just about fixing the atmosphere. It's about giving people hope. They need to believe things can get better." Elena nodded slowly. "I know. That's why I kept going, even when it felt pointless. If people lose hope, then we've already lost." Daniel smiled faintly. "Well, let's make sure that doesn't happen." Their conversation turned lighter after that, shifting away from the pressures of their mission. They talked about Earth and Leora, sharing stories about their homes and families. Elena learned that Daniel had grown up near a sprawling forest, which explained his passion for environmental restoration. In turn, she told him about her childhood fascination with the stars, a love that had eventually led her to pursue science. As the hours passed, the tension between them eased, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. They weren't just colleagues anymore. They were partners, united by a shared goal. And though neither of them said it aloud, both knew that their bond was becoming something deeper. By the end of the week, they had made significant progress. Daniel's initial prototype for the modified ether converter was ready for testing. It was smaller than the final version would need to be, but it represented a crucial step forward. The entire team gathered in the lab to watch as Daniel powered up the device, its sleek metal frame glowing faintly as it came to life. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Then slowly, the air around the machine began to change. The greenish haze that had hung thick in the room started to thin, replaced by a clearer, cleaner atmosphere. Instruments monitoring the air quality showed a noticeable improvement. Cheers erupted throughout the lab, breaking the silence that had gripped everyone moments earlier. Elena turned to Daniel. Her face lit up with a mixture of relief and excitement. "It works," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It actually works." Daniel grinned, though he quickly tempered his enthusiasm with caution. "This is just the beginning," he reminded her. "We still have a lot of work to do. But yeah, it's a good start." As the celebration died down, reality settled back in. Scaling up the converter to cover the entire planet would require resources they didn't currently have. Building multiple units, deploying them across Leora, and maintaining their operation, all of it would take time, effort, and cooperation. But for the first time in years, the path forward seemed clear. Elena and Daniel exchanged a glance, silently reaffirming their commitment to the task ahead. Whatever challenges lay in store, they would face them together. And with each passing day, the dream of a healthier, greener Leora felt a little less impossible. The initial success of the ether converter prototype filled the lab with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in months, the team at the research facility allowed themselves to feel a glimmer of optimism. Elena and Daniel stood side by side, watching as the air quality monitors showed steady improvement in the small test chamber. It was proof that their efforts were not in vain. But both knew this was only the beginning. Turning the prototype into a planet-wide solution would be far more difficult. Daniel spent hours poring over the data from the test, looking for flaws or limitations in the design. He worked late into the night, often joined by Elena, who refused to leave his side. Together, they identified areas where the converter needed improvement, ways to make it more efficient, durable, and scalable. Every detail mattered, and neither of them was willing to cut corners. One morning, as sunlight filtered weakly through the toxic haze outside, Daniel called a meeting with the entire team. The room buzzed with nervous energy as everyone gathered around the central table. Elena stood beside him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, while Daniel spread out updated blueprints and diagrams. "Here's the plan," he began, his voice calm but firm. "We need to build multiple units of the converter, each one capable of purifying large sections of the atmosphere. Then we'll deploy them across the planet, starting with the most heavily affected areas." A murmur rippled through the room. One of the scientists raised her hand hesitantly. "That sounds great in theory, but how are we supposed to build and maintain so many units? We don't have the resources or manpower." Daniel nodded, acknowledging the concern. "You're right. Scaling up is going to require help, not just from us, but from everyone on Leora. We'll need materials, funding, and volunteers to assist with construction and deployment. This isn't something we can do alone." Elena stepped forward, addressing the group. "We've already lost too much. If we want to save our planet, we have to come together. Every person, every community has a role to play. We can't wait for someone else to fix this. It's up to us." Her words struck a chord with the team. Slowly, heads began to nod in agreement. They understood the enormity of the task ahead, but they also recognized the urgency. There was no time left for doubt or hesitation. Over the next few days, Elena and Daniel worked tirelessly to rally support for their plan. They traveled to nearby towns and villages, speaking to local leaders and citizens about the potential of the ether converter. At first, many were skeptical. Some had grown cynical after years of failed attempts to restore the planet. Others worried that trusting an outsider like Daniel might lead to further disaster. But Elena refused to give up. She shared stories of the prototype's success, showing videos and charts to illustrate its effectiveness. She spoke passionately about the importance of unity and perseverance. "This isn't just about technology," she told a crowded hall in one town. "It's about believing in ourselves and in each other. If we work together, we can turn things around." Daniel complemented her speeches with technical explanations, breaking down complex concepts into simple terms anyone could understand. He emphasized that the ether converter wasn't a magic solution. It required effort and collaboration to succeed. His honesty and humility won over even the most reluctant skeptics. As word spread, people began to take notice. Communities started organizing meetings to discuss how they could contribute. Factories offered surplus materials. Farmers donated food to feed workers, and volunteers signed up to help with construction. Even children pitched in, collecting scraps of metal and other useful items. The response was overwhelming, and for the first time in years, Leora felt alive with hope. Back at the research facility, progress accelerated. With newfound resources and manpower, the team was able to assemble additional prototypes of the ether converter. Each unit was larger and more powerful than the last, designed to cover greater distances and handle higher concentrations of toxins. Testing revealed minor issues which Daniel and Elena addressed quickly, tweaking the design until it met their standards. Despite their growing success, challenges remained. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel sat alone in the lab, staring at a malfunctioning component. No matter what he tried, he couldn't get it to function properly. Frustration bubbled inside him, threatening to spill over. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, and let out a heavy sigh. Elena found him moments later, slumped over his desk. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" she asked softly. Daniel shook his head. "I don't know. What if this doesn't work? What if we put all this effort into something that fails in the end?" Elena pulled up a chair beside him. "Failure isn't an option," she said firmly. "Not when there's still a chance to succeed. Look how far we've come already. People, believe in us, Daniel. They're counting on us. We can't let them down." Her words struck a nerve. Daniel looked at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. She was right, they couldn't afford to give up now. Failure would mean the end of Leora, and he wasn't ready to accept that outcome. With renewed resolve, Daniel returned to work. He and Elena pored over the faulty component, analyzing every inch of it until they discovered the problem. A tiny crack in one of the internal circuits. It was a simple fix, but it highlighted the importance of paying attention to even the smallest details. Once repaired, the converter ran smoothly, its performance exceeding expectations. As the weeks passed, the team completed several functional units of the ether converter. The first deployment took place in a valley near the research facility, one of the most polluted regions on the planet. Trucks carrying the massive machines rolled into position, guided by teams of engineers and volunteers. The sight of so many people working together was inspiring, a testament to the power of unity. When the converters were activated, the change was immediate. The thick green haze that had choked the valley began to lift, revealing patches of blue sky above. Birds that had long since abandoned the area returned, their calls echoing through the air. Plants sprouted from the ground, vibrant and green, as if waking from a long slumber. The transformation was breathtaking, leaving everyone speechless. News of the success spread quickly, igniting a wave of excitement across Leora. More deployments followed, each one bringing new life to previously barren landscapes. Rivers flowed cleaner, forests grew denser, and animals reclaimed their habitats. The planet was healing slowly but surely. For Elena and Daniel, the progress was bittersweet. They celebrated each victory, knowing how much it meant to the people of Leora. But they also understood that their work was far from over. Covering the entire planet would take months, possibly years, and even then, maintaining the converters would require constant vigilance. Still, they pressed on, driven by a shared sense of purpose. Their bond had deepened over the weeks, forged through countless hours of hard work and mutual respect. Though neither of them spoke of it openly, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a connection that went beyond friendship. Late one night, as they stood outside the lab watching the stars peek through the thinning haze, Elena broke the silence. "Do you ever think about what happens after this?" she asked quietly. Daniel glanced at her, surprised by the question. "After we finish the project, you mean?" She nodded. "Yeah. Once the planet is stable again, what will—" "You do? Will you go back to Earth?" He hesitated, unsure how to answer. The thought of leaving Leora and Elena behind weighed heavily on him, but he also knew he couldn't stay forever. "I haven't decided yet," he admitted. "But wherever I go, I'll always remember this place, and you." Elena smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed a hint of sadness. "I hope you stick around for a while longer. We still need you." Daniel returned her smile, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "Then I guess I'm not going anywhere anytime soon." As they stood there under the emerging stars, surrounded by the hum of machinery and the promise of renewal, both knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. Together, they had given Leora a second chance, and together, they would see it through to the end. The deployment of the ether converters continued to gain momentum, spreading across Leora like ripples on a pond. Each successful activation brought visible changes to the environment: cleaner air, greener landscapes, and signs of life returning to areas long thought lost. The people of Leora worked tirelessly, united by a shared goal that had once seemed impossible. Factories churned out parts for new converters. Volunteers transported equipment to remote regions, and scientists monitored the progress with unwavering dedication. It was as if the entire planet had awakened from a long sleep, determined to reclaim its future. Elena and Daniel stood at the heart of it all, guiding the effort with steady hands and clear vision. They traveled frequently, visiting different regions to oversee deployments and address any challenges that arose. Their presence inspired confidence among the workers who saw them not just as leaders but as symbols of hope. Wherever they went, people greeted them warmly, expressing gratitude for their tireless efforts. Elena often found herself overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, while Daniel humbly reminded everyone that the real heroes were the people doing the hard work on the ground. Despite the progress, obstacles remained. Some regions were harder to reach than others, requiring teams to navigate treacherous terrain or endure harsh weather conditions. Supplies occasionally ran low, forcing delays in construction. And there were still skeptics, those who doubted whether the converters could truly reverse decades of damage. But Elena and Daniel faced each challenge head-on, refusing to let setbacks derail their mission. One day, during a visit to a mountainous area in the northern hemisphere, Daniel noticed something troubling. The converter deployed there wasn't performing as efficiently as the others. Readings showed that toxin levels were dropping, but not at the expected rate. He immediately called for a team meeting, gathering everyone involved in the project to discuss the issue. "We need to figure out why this unit is underperforming," he said, pointing to a graph displayed on a portable screen. "If we don't address it now, it could affect our overall success." Elena studied the data carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It might be the altitude," she suggested after a moment. "The air pressure here is lower than in other regions. That could be interfering with the filtration process." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. We'll need to adjust the design to account for these conditions. Let's run some tests and see what modifications we can make." The team got to work, dismantling part of the converter to examine its internal components. Hours passed as they tested various adjustments, tweaking settings, and recalibrating sensors. The process was tedious, but no one complained. Everyone understood the importance of getting it right. Finally, after a full day of trial and error, they identified the problem. A valve designed to regulate airflow was malfunctioning due to the thin atmosphere. With a few precise modifications, they managed to fix the issue. When the converter was reactivated, the results were immediate. Toxin levels began dropping rapidly, matching the performance of units in other regions. The relief in the room was palpable. Workers cheered and clapped, congratulating each other on another victory. Elena turned to Daniel, her face glowing with pride. "This is why we're going to succeed," she said, "because we never stop trying." He smiled, though his expression was tinged with exhaustion. "Let's just hope we can keep this pace up." As the weeks turned into months, the scale of the operation grew exponentially. More converters were built and deployed, covering larger swaths of the planet. Entire ecosystems began to recover, with rivers flowing clean again and forests reclaiming land that had been barren for years. Wildlife returned in droves, filling the air with sounds that hadn't been heard in generations. People ventured outside without masks, breathing freely for the first time in decades. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. But the journey wasn't without its emotional toll. Both Elena and Daniel pushed themselves to their limits, rarely taking breaks or allowing themselves moments of rest. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on their shoulders, knowing that millions of lives depended on their success. Late nights became routine, and fatigue was a constant companion. Yet neither of them considered stepping back. They had come too far to give up now. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Elena and Daniel found themselves sitting alone on a hill overlooking a recently restored valley. The sun was setting, casting golden light over fields of wildflowers that swayed gently in the breeze. Birds chirped in the distance, and the air smelled fresh and sweet, a stark contrast to the toxic haze that had once dominated the landscape. It's beautiful, Elena whispered, her voice filled with awe. I almost forgot what it felt like to see this kind of beauty. Daniel nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. It's worth every sleepless night, he said softly. Every argument, every failure, it's all worth it when you see something like this. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply sat there, soaking in the peacefulness of the scene before them. It was a rare opportunity to pause and reflect, to appreciate how far they'd come. Eventually, Elena broke the silence. Do you ever wonder if we're doing enough? She asked, her tone hesitant. What if we miss something? What if the converters fail in the long run? Daniel sighed, understanding her fears all too well. We can't control everything, he admitted. All we can do is our best, and honestly, I think we're doing pretty damn good. She chuckled softly, shaking her head. When did you get so optimistic? When I met you, he replied, with a grin. You've taught me that even in the darkest times, there's always a reason to keep fighting. Elena looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She realized how much he had changed since arriving on Leora, not just in his approach to the project, but in his outlook on life. In many ways, they had saved each other, giving strength and purpose when it was needed most. As the days passed, the final stages of the deployment plan took shape. The last remaining converters were scheduled to be activated within weeks, marking the culmination of months of relentless effort. Elena and Daniel prepared to present their findings to Leora's governing council, hoping to secure ongoing support for maintenance and monitoring programs. The presentation took place in a grand hall filled with representatives from across the planet. Elena stood at the podium, her voice steady as she outlined the progress they had made and the steps required to ensure long-term success. Behind her, holographic images displayed before and after views of various regions, showcasing the dramatic improvements brought about by the converters. The audience listened intently, their expressions ranging from disbelief to amazement. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he focused on the technical aspects of the project, explaining how the converters functioned and emphasizing the importance of sustainability. This isn't just a temporary fix, he said firmly. It's a foundation for the future, but it requires commitment from all of us to maintain what we've built. His words resonated deeply with the council members, who nodded in agreement. By the end of the presentation, the room erupted in applause. The council unanimously approved funding for continued operations, pledging to prioritize environmental restoration moving forward. Afterward, as Elena and Daniel left the hall, they were surrounded by cheering crowds. People reached out to shake their hands, thanking them for their contributions. For a brief moment, they allowed themselves to bask in the celebration, knowing they had earned it. Yet even amidst the joy, they couldn't ignore the reality ahead. The converters were powerful tools, but they weren't infallible. Maintaining the planet's health would require vigilance and cooperation for years to come. Still, they faced the future with confidence, knowing they had laid the groundwork for lasting change. As they walked side by side through the streets of the capital city, now bustling with renewed energy, Elena glanced at Daniel and smiled. We did it, she said simply. He returned her smile, his eyes reflecting the same quiet pride. Yeah, we did. The final converter was activated on a cool morning, its hum blending with the sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves. It marked the completion of a journey that had begun with desperation and uncertainty, but ended with triumph and renewal. The air across Leora was cleaner than it had been in decades, and the planet's people could finally breathe freely without fear. Fields once barren now bloomed with wildflowers, rivers ran clear, and animals roamed freely through revitalized forests. Life was returning to Leora, and it was happening faster than anyone had dared to hope. Elena stood beside Daniel at the activation site, watching as the last traces of greenish haze dissipated into the sky. Her heart swelled with pride and gratitude, not just for the success of the project, but for the unity it had inspired. People from every corner of the planet had come together, working side by side to heal their world. It was a testament to what could be achieved when hope and determination outweighed despair. Daniel looked over at Elena, his expression thoughtful. It's strange, isn't it? He said after a moment. After all this time, it almost feels like we're done. But really, this is just the beginning. Elena nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The converters were powerful tools, but they weren't a permanent solution. Maintaining the planet's health would require constant effort. Monitoring toxin levels, repairing equipment, and ensuring that no one reverted to the destructive practices that had caused the crisis in the first place. Still, she felt confident that Leora's people were ready to take on the responsibility. They had proven themselves capable of incredible things. As the days passed, life on Leora began to stabilize. Communities rebuilt homes and farms, planting crops in soil that was rich and fertile once again. Schools reopened, children played outside without masks, and markets buzzed with activity. The sense of renewal extended beyond the environment. It touched every aspect of society. People spoke openly about the lessons they had learned, vowing never to repeat the mistakes of the past. For Elena, the change was deeply personal. She had spent years consumed by her work, driven by a singular focus on saving her planet. Now, with the immediate threat gone, she found herself reflecting on other parts of her life. She realized how much she had grown, not just as a scientist, but as a person, and much of that growth was thanks to Daniel. Daniel, too, had changed during his time on Leora. When he first arrived, he had been focused solely on the technical aspects of the project, viewing it as a challenge to be solved. But over the months, he had come to see it as something more, a chance to make a real difference in the lives of others. He had formed deep connections with the people of Leora, especially Elena, and those relationships had reshaped his perspective in ways he hadn't anticipated. One evening, as the two of them sat together on a hill overlooking the restored landscape, Daniel turned to Elena with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice hesitant. "About what happens next, for me, I mean." Elena tensed slightly, sensing where the conversation might lead. "You're going back to Earth, aren't you?" she asked quietly. Daniel hesitated before nodding. "I think I have to. My team there needs me, and there's still so much work to do on other projects, but..." He paused, searching for the right words. "Leaving here won't be easy. Not after everything we've been through." Elena forced a smile, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of sadness. "You gave us more than clean air, Daniel. You gave us hope. No matter where you go, you'll always be part of Leora." Her words meant more to him than she could have known. He reached out, placing a hand on hers. "And you'll always be part of me," he replied softly. "I'll come back, you know, as often as I can. This place and you are too important to leave behind completely." They sat in silence for a while, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Neither of them needed to say anything more. Their bond had grown stronger than words could express, forged through shared struggles and victories. In the weeks that followed, Daniel prepared for his departure. He worked closely with Elena and the rest. Once,